and allow me to better understand different styles, different work ethics.
Yeah.
And you know what? There's 100 ways to skin a cat. The end result was making sure that they were putting points on the board and that we did it honest, with integrity, and represented the organization to the best of our ability. But it was like herding cats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to imagine that was tough. I mean, like you said, you didn't foresee this for yourself.
No.
So it was something that was put on your plate and said, here, you got to figure it out.
Well, and the team was so diverse. I had somebody that was probably old enough to be my father. I had somebody that had very little corporate national account experience. So the six members of the sixth team were just...
They had all different, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and work ethic was very different, style was very different, and so then it forces you to have to be adaptive to the individual, to the style, but making sure that the message is on point and that, again, you're putting points on the board. Yeah,
and so that's my next question then. So how did you get through that phase? Was it
all
trial? Was it trial and error by any means, or did you have someone that helped you kind of get through what you were experiencing in the same way that you were with the sales portion inside of things? Was there someone that had been through, hey, this is your first year as a manager, this is what to expect, or this is how you get through this situation? Was there anybody to support you through that?
Well, I had Rob as my mentor to always help support, but I think what I went back to them is how can I help you to help us both, right?
Yeah.
And so I tried then putting it on a different lens and let me, how can I mentor you or be of help to you? And so then I started engaging more in day-to-day activities. I take notes. So what is their spouse's name? What is their kid's name? And it's little silly things, but it brought some commonality to the relationship. And I think then they wanted to be successful by me hoping and fostering.
It showed that you actually cared, right?
Exactly.
Instead of just treating them as a number, right? Because that can be very easy to do when we're talking about sales. And I'm assuming that you're put on the chopping block based on how they're performing.
Yeah. Yeah. There was an expectation. So there was at the time, and it was insignificant. It was probably like a $75 million deal that I was put into this role to bring to fruition with these 6 people.
Okay.
And so it was a journey. We got the deal, and that was, we did it right and ethically, but it was interesting.
All right. Well, so, and that was, what was the title again? Was that the
Director of Corporate National Accounts.
Okay. So what about so I think we skipped over one then. So when you were territory manager, that would have been your first, right?
That would have been my first.
Okay.
Yeah. That was as we were surgical sales consultant.
Okay.
And so then from surgical sales consultant, I was promoted to Midwest corporate. I don't even know what.
Yeah. So just in terms of size, though, so you were dealing with a smaller group even before that. Is that correct? Or maybe not even smaller, but
it was still an individual contributor when I was in that role of the Midwest. It was more of a training function and sales function to help people develop.
So it was more people
mentor people
doing exactly what you did.
Exactly.
And the other
they didn't
was
report to me. They reported to someone else, but I was there to coach, to mentor, and to focus on growth.
So ultimately, the first transition was Chuck's a top performer. We're going to have him mentor some of these other guys that aren't performing quite as well to hopefully increase everybody's sales.
Absolutely. And I have responsibility for the Midwest. It was a great position, a lot of fun. It was during the safety heyday. So the federal mandate put out a safety mandate. And so everyone had to use within the acute market safety devices. And so it was really to get people engaged and motivated and start talking about clinical practices and safety and efficacy and all that stuff. So
okay. And so that was probably the beginning of you understanding that there's 1,000 other ways that people are doing things. Was that maybe the first that were you so dialed in on your process and how you do things that it was alarming to you to think that there could be other ways that people get it done?
Well, and this sounds arrogant, and I'm not at all at work. It validated to me why I was promoted after working with probably 50 other sales professionals, just to see style and lack of concern or lack of follow-up. Or, I mean, no matter what you do, you should always be prepared and be the best that you can be, and constantly reinventing yourself.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say right off the rip, that tells me you were so focused on doing the absolute best that you could. It was almost like you had blinders on, that you didn't even realize that anybody else existed in terms of other salespeople, right? You weren't watching what they were doing and getting upset or jealous or any of those things. So I think that's a huge thing for people to pay attention to there, is the fact that you were so focused on only what you were doing and only doing it the way that you felt you could do it best, and giving it 100% of your time and energy.
No, absolutely. And it was, like I said, it was interesting because it was an awakening to see the different styles, and it's still interesting, even in this role that I'm in today, and working with 3,300 sales professionals. Everybody has a different style, but I think we all have a common goal, right? Yeah. And that's to bring organizational revenue, to do what's right, to help patients, and so on. But the earlier days was definitely an interesting thing, seeing styles.
Yeah. I think what's even crazier too, though, is there's a lot of situations where some of the people that you would think could never close a deal are crazy good at doing it in a completely different way than you would go about it. There's some people that could be shy as could be, but are very direct and to the point and can be great at sales. Maybe aren't super talkative, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting that you say that, because some of the people that I do ride days with, that was a job that was Monday through Friday on the road all over the Midwest. But people that I didn't really hold high regard, after having an opportunity to work in the field with them, I'm like, damn, you're good.
Yeah.
Overcoming objections and just being on point. And then you'd see others that were less engaged.
Yeah. Well, and then there could be other ones that are chatty Cathy, talking a bunch, but not closing the deal. Oh, and that's kind of what we're talking about, right? It's about outcome. It's not about style, right?
No, I say it all the time. This is a performance-based organization. You're here to perform, or there's another place for you.
All right. So that was what was that time frame when you were doing that?
So that was 1998 to 2001, I think.
Okay. And this is when you were doing individual ride-alongs in this situation, right?
Yeah, that was as the Midwest Sales Development Manager.
Okay. And so that was all you doing ultimately in managing ultimately what you did on your own first.
Correct.
And then the next step was moving into a position where you were working on the larger deals, more similar to what you're doing now. Is that correct?
As the Midwest, I was focused on a specific vertical.
Okay.
But then when I moved in 2001, 2002 into strategic accounts, that's when I had entire portfolio responsibility.
Okay.
And so it was different. It was different, but it's allowed me to be successful at where I am and having a little bit of knowledge of all of our verticals within the organization.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many different ways that I could take this here, but you continue to be thrown different trajectories that your career went, and new challenges and new things that you were learning. What kept you motivated and kept you confident in your ability to figure things out, even though it was always something different? It's not that the one thing that you did prior necessarily translated or helped you be a better manager or any of those things. What kept you confident in your ability to figure it out?
Well, I think more importantly, I love what I did. I loved the organization that I represented, and I always wanted to be better and do better, not just in my professional life, but in my personal life. And so I think always maintaining goals and setting goals and expectations of where you want to be in 3 years, 5 years, regardless if it's in the organization or outside another organization, you need to develop a plan, but make sure that you work the plan.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit how everybody's different in regards to goal setting, right? And how they do it. I personally am very structured, where I write everything out and the numbers are there and it's got to look pretty and all that. That's my style. There's some people that are more, they got the vision board and it's more mystical and magical, right? So I'm curious a little bit, how do you go about that process? And I think the reason I want you to go into detail on this is because I think it's very, for people that think very logically or like are good with math or things like that, I think it's very effective to be able to see everything out in front of them and see the clear path to where you want to go. So would you mind, like, what is your process? Do you on a yearly basis sit down and go through the next 12 months and this is what I want to achieve, this is why, all this stuff? How do you go about that?
It sounds crazy, Ryan, but I do it like quarterly.
Okay.
Just because, and I have to write things down because I'm a guy that, like, I have a to-do list every day. I check the box.
Well, these are the little things that I want to get into that I don't think people necessarily understand. There's so much time and energy that goes into having the success that you do. You don't just wake up, roll out of bed at 9:30 and happen to be good at what you do. It's all strategic. It's all planned. It's all thought through.
Well, and I think I have to make sure, just because of the responsibility that I have, or we have as an organization, is that every day is well planned out, well executed. I mean, you only have 8 to 10 hours within that day to make sure you're accomplishing. But as it goes to career like goals, I mean, I do it quarterly just because we have so much fluidity of what's going on with contracts, deals, and changes within the organization. You have to be able to be nimble and pivot. And so it's quarterly, but I have to write stuff down. I'm still old school, where I don't have to, I can't do this whole vision in my head and this is what it's going to look like. This is what needs to be done this quarter. This is what needs to be done. If it's not obtained, then I move it to the following quarter.
Okay.
But eventually it gets checked.
And how do you tie that into your day-to-day? Because there's obviously an important connection that needs to be made between seeing that on the wall of like, yeah, it'd be great if I did that, but how do you tie in the day-to-day of, I'm going to take these actions that's going to get me to this end goal?
Well, like I said, a lot of our deals are, I mean, they can be 18 months to 36 months. So you have to have the ability to have the foresight to see, okay, this is not going to be something that happens or evolves quickly. But you have to make sure that there's steps and you're continually revisiting it. And that's why, I mean, writing it down, putting it on a calendar. I mean, I put stuff in my calendar that's 16 months out just so that it's, where am I at? What needs to be done? And has this fallen through the cracks?
Is that a process that you have been following for a long time, or when did you start really taking that serious? I would assume, I mean, obviously your role has gotten very, very critical at this point, so you can't be.
Well, as you evolve in the organization, your responsibility, and again, like I said, there's 9 or 10 of us that sign agreements. I'm not going to sign something that doesn't meet the standards of the organization, and so you have to take that with responsibility and making sure that all things are checked, balanced, and good to go.
Yeah.
So no, always. I think I lost track of what your question
No,
was.
it's just, I was just more so, when did you start realizing that was a positive habit for you? When did you start doing that?
In 2015, when I took on the role as far as the GPO team. Again, when the organization, we've done $50 billion in acquisition in the past 7 years. And so BD has exploded with acquisition. And so now the number of contracts that we have, the number of business that we do, the SAP platforms that we work off of, I have to be more thorough and buttoned up. Otherwise, I would never be successful. And so therefore, that's why those checklists every day, quarterly goals, annual goals, personally and professionally. I put them all together.
I was going to ask you how do you tie that in? So do you have a planner? How do you typically do this?
Well, I do. I have a obviously my phone, my device I use, but then I have a planner because that's old school. I got to write it down.
Me too.
And then I carry a binder in my briefcase where it's silly stuff, but it's a constant refresher or reminder. I go back to the binder, I go back to the day timer, and I look at my phone. I mean, I can show you, I have a to-do list for tomorrow already with 6 things on it.
Yeah. What is your habits in terms of how you, is it the first thing you do when you wake up? Or, because I think that
I add to it throughout the day.
Okay. I
can be at the gym and I'm like, I got to do this. I got to do that. I need to add this. I need to add that. Making sure that I follow up. And then I have a great admin. She's awesome. She keeps me on check. I always tell people she's the brains behind the organization. She's like, no, Chuck, you're not doing that. I'm like, okay, Chuck's not doing that.
Well, I'm glad that this made the docket here. I'm glad that I got past the threshold there.
She's good.
No, that's awesome. All right. So Let's get in a little bit to when you started transitioning into the bigger roles, right? So you went from Midwest, still very much so it's on your own performance, right? And I want to hear steps and things that you learned as you got into. It's not always you can force it yourself, right? It's more now you got to rely on your ability to lead and your ability to communicate and all these other details that have to come together to create the result versus just working hard. Because I think that's a big transition. Some people are very good as an individual salesperson, but struggle when it comes down to pulling everything together.
Well, I think success is it's not just working hard, but it's working smart, right? I mean, you have to obviously make sure that you know what the end result is and that you plan how to get there and have the right vehicles to get there, the right resources. At our organization, they provide us with so many tools and resources. There's no way you can't be successful, in my opinion. But making sure that you develop the relationships with the key people that are involved in our selling process, because the sales process is so long. I've been fortunate because of being around the organization for so long. People know me, the customers all over the U.S. And so it's helped in each role that I've done, because people are like, no one is left. You're like the only person that I know that's still at BD. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's been a good run.
You've been doing a good job there. So. But yeah, so when we talk about like your national, so when you were managing things at a national level, which is a big difference, obviously, than just doing what you were doing in your sole region.
Right.
So what was that like? Was there big pressure that you felt at that point? Because I just want to hear kind of the emotions and feelings you went through as you went through each step of this, because it obviously was a new challenge.
Well, I knew that I wasn't going to fail, and I knew that success was imminent. We had to figure out a plan. But again, I made sure that I worked all the resources. So part of that was the 6 individuals, making sure that everyone was in sync and in alignment on what our messaging was going to be, how we were going to approach this, making sure that we had the right ASP for what we were proposing. But we were always prepared and engaged and accessible. That was the other thing I wanted to make sure that if customers reached out, we had a prompt response back. I'm a little anal about that, although it didn't display that when you tried calling me twice, so I apologize. But typically, I'm pretty prompt.
No, so was that an interesting transition for you, going from doing it yourself to now I got to communicate how for others to do that? What was that like for you? Did you feel like you gained an understanding of really what made you successful, or how you did things well when you were able to teach it to someone else?
Well, I think that was an organizational concern with one of the gentlemen that actually hired me to go into the VP role. He was fearful that not having the ability to always be on stage and stuff, and now coaching and mentoring people, am I going to be as equally passionate and driven where I'm no longer an individual contributor, but I'm responsible for a group of people. But it's been a journey, and it's been a growth. And actually, hindsight now, I probably enjoy having the ability to work and see different styles. But at first, I was apprehensive because I'm so prescriptive. This is, I used to say, all right, if you want to win, just let me take the wheel. Yeah. But then now it's like, how can I be a tool to support and provide you the resources? So,
I think that's huge that you had the humility to step aside and say, I want to know how I can be a best resource to you. And that could be different for every single person that you ask that question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the bottom line is, what my response, and this is one of our old VPs, he's no longer with us, but he's like, find a way, make a way to win. Yeah. And so I'll always find a way that we can make this win. If the resource or the team or the directors or other VPs come and say, Chuck, this is what we have, let's dive into this. How can we make this work so it's a mutual win-win for the hospital as well as the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. What was the next challenge for you? So you said it was a short 2 years, you said, with those 6 people for that deal.
Short, long 2 years.
Short, long 2 years, correct. What was the next step for you, and what was the next step in your journey?
So that was when I got promoted into the GPO world, and I think that
I'm sorry. What GPO?
Group purchasing organization. Okay. So
sorry, we got to speak English for everybody, including myself.
No, I apologize. So GPOs are responsible for all of the hospitals in the U.S. healthcare market, and so they're typically aligned to one or another, and so it gives them greater buying power when you're looking at them. So the analogy I always use for GPOs is there's like three in the U.S. It's like a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac from a baking industry, one or the other. Mm-hmm. And so that's really who my customer is, or one of like the Fannie Mae's.
So what was that next step like for you? How did your responsibility change? Where were you? What was your day-to-day like at that point?
I was kind of lost because I was now negotiating terms and conditions. I had no legal background. I was a sales guy that was wickedly successful, and now I'm being put into the role that I had no idea what the heck I was doing.
Yeah.
But again, relying on the organization and some great mentors, you dig in and you learn every day. You gotta constantly be making sure you reinvent yourself. And it doesn't matter if you're selling cars or you're selling software or selling medical devices. You have to be the best you and constantly stay ahead of the industry and where you're supposed to be.
It sounds like you were very okay with failure, though, to be honest, because especially that, for example, I know for a fact that myself having a sales background, if I had to negotiate contracts in regards to the fine print that, again, only attorneys know what they're talking about, that's a very challenging thing, and you're going to know that you're going to fail going into that. Do you think that a lot of the background that you had in getting the door slammed in your face and a number of rejections that you had made you okay with failure?
Yeah, because I think, again, failure, it can be a good thing, right? Because it teaches you things to know and not repeat, or, it allows you to expand and understand, all right, this is not going to work for me again. How can I reinvent myself? What do we need to do differently? But making sure that you use it as a learning lesson and not replicating. But I knew nothing about terms and conditions, force majeure, indemnity. I mean, all that stuff was like Mandarin to me. I was like, let's get the deal. How do we execute this?
I think that's so wild also, though, that they were willing to allow you to learn through that process. That's a huge leap of faith that they gave.
Experience, right?
That's what I'm saying.
At all, none. I was so overwhelmed, and hindsight now, I can, repeat force majeure, indemnity. I know everything that needs to be there, but boy, I'll tell you, if you asked me that 5 years ago, I would have never.
And that's so. Why do you think they were so confident in allowing you to learn versus maybe taking someone in that did know more from a educational standpoint, but maybe didn't have the passion and the commitment to the company like you did?
And I think because they saw that, honestly, I had a legacy or a history of being successful and constantly trying to do what was right and constantly looking to be the best that I can be. I mean, I'm sure there were other people that were probably more qualified.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
And it's funny because on the interview for that, I went with another colleague, and people were like, "You guys are going to dinner and you're interviewing for that same position." Fortunately, I got the job, but the reality is I was always looking to make sure whoever was in that role or whoever got that role, they were representing the organization. Because if that wasn't my time to get that role would come and it would be my time. It was just a matter of when, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. So I want to get in a little bit too. So at what point were you put in a position of vice president? Was that
2015?
So that was that. Okay.
That was that role.
So outside of scanning through deals in that way, what are all your responsibilities in regards to that role?
So we just need to make sure that there's pricing discipline within the organization, that there's not terms and conditions that would create exposure to our organization or things that we would accept that would set a precedence with future hospitals or customers.
Got it.
But much of what we do is each deal looks vastly different. You can have a $50 million deal or you can have a $75 million deal. But you have to make sure that there's parity in language and terms, and doesn't need to be in pricing, but it needs to make sure that all of the legal jargon is consistent, so there's no inconsistencies.
That is wild that's the role that truly, that to me, that sounds so much like an attorney. It's wild to me that you would be in that position versus them hiring someone that.
Well, and it seems disconnected from actually sales. But the nice thing is being able to go into the field and negotiate and help people work on these deals, these $75 million deals. That's the reward.
That is interesting because it is kind of a hybrid, right? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to close the deal, but it's a very complex deal. It's not one that's just like, do you want to buy this simple thing? It's
I still have a $1.7 billion quota.
Yeah.
So you got to make sure that all the resources, all the tools are being used and made available.
Yeah.
So,
well, I want to lastly get into one more thing prior to us capping things off here. So you've obviously done very, very well in terms of trying to be your very best in every role that you've been in professionally. How would you say that translated to the way that you look at your personal life? Do you use some of the similar habits and routines of how you do check your quarterly goals and how you do set intentions for that day and a number of those different habits? Do you use those same habits to have success with your family?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm avid and working out, going to the gym, being outside, exercising. Yeah. And I think it's a habit that we've instilled not only in my wife, but the kids as well. They have a pretty active life and outside of work as well as personally and professionally. But yeah, no, I have goals they set for personally at the gym and stuff. And so,
is that something that you did for a long time, or did it take maybe proving it to yourself professionally first to say, hey, I could maybe start being this strategic with the way I look at my personal life too? Or is that something that you always did?
No, honestly, I found that the gym was actually an avenue to disconnect from work, even though I didn't necessarily connect, because I could be on the treadmill or I could be on the floor, and I'm like, I got to do this. I got to write this down. And I constantly add to that to-do list. But more importantly, I think, you got to be physically healthy to be mentally healthy. And my mental health was all helpful through the gym because it allowed me to just kind of rethink the day, pause, reflect. What do I need to do? What do I need to revisit? What needs to be changed?
Yeah.
And it's tweaking.
Yeah, no, 100% it is. All right. So I want to wrap things up with a couple key takeaways for those that are watching. And we can start from your background, and then I want to go as more of a blanket statement for everybody. Mm-hmm. So in med device in particular. So if you were to give three pieces of advice for someone who is looking to get started in med device sales in particular, what would be the three keys that you would give them?
I would be thoughtful on the organization in which you would interview or go into, because there's specific organizations that are thought leaders within healthcare community. Be open, honest, and be yourself, completely transparent, but always be prepared when going in for interviews. But do your homework on the organizations that you go to. I was lucky, truly. I didn't realize I had multiple interviews back in 95, 96. But the reality is I didn't know how well-grounded or well-received BD was in the industry until I started calling and during the interview process and getting feedback from customers.
You were doing research and learned, hey, this is where I really want to be.
Yeah, if you want the right fit, right, and you want to make a career for yourself and longevity, make sure you're making that right fit. You just don't, buy a car without taking it for a test drive or doing your homework, or, it's the same for a career. Device is a great industry.
Yeah,
it really is. It's hard to get into anymore, but it's a great career.
No, and that came up in another one of my interviews is we talked specifically about people just look at the surface level picture of what a job might look like instead of actually really understanding all the nuts and bolts that go into that organization or that business, or because there's so many different niches, to your point, right? You could sell all different kinds of products or be in the pharmaceutical side. There's a number of different directions, but it's important to find out, I think, and do your homework prior to just jumping into something randomly without having a clue.
Absolutely. And I think the one thing about BD I'm very fortunate about, I don't feel like it's a job. I love what I do. I love the organization. I have great customers. every day is different. It's not like going to work. It's work to me is like a job that you don't enjoy. If you really find something that you're passionate about and enjoy doing, it never seems like work.
Yeah.
It'll evolve.
You'll start there. That's for those watching, start there. So I do want to now, as a generalization for anybody, regardless of what industry they get into, if you were to go back 27 years from now and give someone 3 pieces of advice on how to kind of get started and find a direction of where to start piecing this whole thing together, what would be the 3 things that you would tell them?
Put a plan together on what type of career you want to get into. What does the industry look like? Is there somebody that can help coach or mentor you to get you there? And make sure that you cast a broad net. Let people know that you're looking to get into this industry and that you're putting yourself out there, and be prepared. I mean, preparation is everything. I say that all the time, only because it's how you start your day, and it's, making sure that you can check all the boxes, that you've completed everything and you're there. But moving forward with your question,
Yeah.
I think just make sure you have a mentor.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I mean, at the end of the day, it ties into what we just talked about in regards to actually knowing what you're getting into and actually knowing what it takes to get there. Because if you don't know, it's what we talked about earlier about if you don't know what exactly you're going to be experiencing in that moment, and you can have someone that already has experienced that to say, hey, this is what I've been through, this is what to expect, it can be a lot easier to get through those tough times.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I want to thank you so much for making the time to be here again today. This has been super insightful, and I'm sure everybody watching is going to take a lot of cool and impactful things that will help them get through their journey. So I want to thank everybody at home for making the time to learn today, believing in the possibility that life can be better, and challenging yourself to grow. I believe everybody's pursuing what they feel to be their dream life, and hopefully today you got one step closer. We'll see you next time, and never stop pursuing precision. All right, everybody, that is going to conclude our episode 7 with Chuck Collis. This is an incredible time for me personally. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. So many valuable pieces of information. So now I'm going to finish up with the 3 most important things that I took personally from this interview. 1, having the courage to fail gives you almost unlimited freedom to take on any new challenge. So throughout this interview, he talked about as he scaled through his career, they were constantly challenging and constantly giving him new things to take on and new responsibilities to uphold. And that came with new skills that had to be learned. And at the end of the day, he didn't have background or experience doing any of them. He failed and failed and failed. And through his background in door knocking and a number of different things that he did in his past, he got comfortable failing. And so this was super valuable in his progression, his growth to where he is today. 2, mentors give you the understanding that other people have been through the same struggles that you're currently going through. So many times I think a lot of us go through difficult and challenging situations thinking that we're the only person that's experiencing it or gone through it in the past. And so having a mentor that allows you to understand that there are other people that are struggling with the same thing, and especially someone that's ahead of us at this point in life that can tell us, hey, I was there before, I went through that challenging time, and I was able to get past it, and look where I'm at now. So that insight can be incredibly valuable to your development. 3, choose longevity over the next buck every single time. Now, what I mean by this is there's a very valuable conversation that Chuck and I had about his transition from doing really, really well in a sales position where he was selling copiers. And he made a lot of money doing that because he was very, very good at doing it. And he could have continued to do that throughout his career, where he just kept chasing the next dollar and kept trying to make more and more and more and more. And what that leads to is a never-ending chase for the next dollar, and that's it. But instead, what he did is he chose an organization and a business that he believed in, that he felt he could devote a lot of his time and energy to because he believed in the same things that that company stood for. And lo and behold, 27 years later, he's holding a vice president position within the company and making a ton of massive decisions for a massive company worldwide. So keep that in mind when you're choosing your careers moving forward.